Hello and welcome to this video in which I will be turning this tablecloth into a Christmas inspired dress. And you might be thinking that looks a lot like velvet fabric, but I assure you this tablecloth has attended many family birthdays. And of course for this project you can use a tablecloth like me or just normal fabric, just make sure that it has a two-way stretch so you don't have to install a zipper. Alright, so onto the measurements you will need for this dress, and they are as follows. The circumference of your overbust, bust, waist, hips and knees, and then the length from your overbust line to the bust line, waistline, hip line, knee line, and your desired dress length. Next, you're gonna fold your fabric and use your measurements to create the shape of the dress. All your circumference measurements should be divided by 4 before you draw them in. And to your right here you can see a little pattern illustration because it wasn't really clear what I was drawing in on the actual fabric in the video, so hopefully this will make it more clear. As you will see in a second on the pattern illustration, you need to leave a little wiggle room at the knee because otherwise you won't be able to walk in the dress, so just keep that in mind when you're drawing the shape of the dress. Then it's time to cut out the pattern piece, which we can then use to create another identical pattern piece. And these two pieces will be your front and back pieces, and all there's left to do is sew the two right sides together. Whenever you're working with stretch fabric, I think there's an important rule to remember, and that is whenever you're sewing a horizontal seam, you should use a zigzag stitch, and whenever it's a vertical seam, you can go ahead and use a straight stitch. At this point the dress was basically finished, so I tried it on to check the fit and I realized I didn't really like that mermaid thingy I had going on at the bottom, so I decided to cut it off and make the dress knee length instead. I think the mermaid part would have looked a lot better if I had cut it out on the bias, so I will keep that in mind for another time. But yeah, here I am cutting off the mermaid part and just telling you that it's time to hem the edges with a zigzag stitch. Next it's time to do the sleeves. I measured the length of my arm and then used that measurement to cut out 2 squares, so basically the sleeves are as wide as they are long. And then to add more width to the bottom of the sleeves, I decided to cut out 2 triangles that I would then add to the squares, and remember that the wider the triangles, the wider the sleeves. The triangles are attached right sides together with the square and sewn together to create a tube. And I should probably say that the triangles have the same height as the squares. And here I am sewing it together, and this would be a vertical seam, so I am using a, you guessed it, a zigzag stitch. Nah, I'm just kidding, it's a straight stitch. The next step is to hem the bottom and top of the sleeves, and here I'm actually using a straight stitch even though it's a horizontal seam, but that's because this part doesn't need to stretch, so it doesn't really matter what stitch you use. And for the final step, cut out a piece of elastic that fits snugly around your upper arm. You can also measure the circumference of your upper arm and then subtract 2 inches from that to get the ideal length for your elastic. Then stretch the elastic out evenly as you sew around inside the top of the sleeve with the zigzag stitch. And there you have it. Now I'm gonna put on the dress and the sleeves, and then I'm gonna show you the final result.